I always thought I had life figured out. My name is Den, and at 38, I've managed to build a stable, fulfilling life, or so I thought. My wife, Laura, and I run a real estate business together. It's a lucrative venture, one we started nearly a decade ago with little more than a modest savings account and a dream. We buy, sell, rent, and manage properties. The business consumes a lot of our time, but it's satisfying work. Watching our efforts pay off in the form of happy clients or profitable deals always feels rewarding. We don't have kids, not because we don't want them, but because we're still figuring out when the right time will be. For now, our lives revolve around our business and each other. Laura handles the numbers, the contracts, and the paperwork, while I thrive on the fieldwork, showing homes, scouting new properties, and negotiating deals. It's a perfect balance, really. Some days, though, I find myself questioning if this is all there is. Our success is undeniable, but there's an emptiness that's harder to ignore lately. Maybe it's the long hours. Maybe it's the monotony of seeing one property after another, walls and ceilings blurring together into a single, forgettable picture. Or maybe it's just me, getting restless in a life I thought I wanted. In my quieter moments, I reflect on how things used to be before the business consumed everything. Back when Laura and I would spend weekends exploring new places, taking road trips, or talking late into the night about the future we wanted to build. Now, our conversations rarely stray far from spreadsheets and client calls. And yet, I can't complain. Laura's been my rock through it all. Her determination and sharp instincts are what have made us successful. I'd be lost without her. But lately, even she seems different. I don't know if it's the stress or if she feels the same void I do. Something's changed, and I can't quite put my finger on it. If you'd asked me 10 years ago where I saw myself at 38, I would have said exactly here. Successful, married to the love of my life, and living in a home we've worked hard to afford. So why does it feel like something is missing? Why does it feel like there's more to this story, waiting just out of reach? The truth is, I don't have answers. I have questions, uncertainties, and a strange itch that tells me things can't stay the way they are forever. But for now, all I can do is keep moving forward. After all, isn't that what life is about? Figuring it out as you go? When I think about my childhood, it feels like a different world. Simpler, freer, and full of possibilities. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a slower pace. My parents, Evelyn and George, were the backbone of my world. They weren't wealthy, but they were hardworking and kind, the kind of people who would give you the shirt off their backs if you needed it. My dad was a carpenter, and I used to watch him in his workshop for hours. He had this way of turning raw pieces of wood into something beautiful and functional. I remember how his hands were always calloused but steady, and how he smelled of sawdust and varnish. He taught me the value of patience, of putting in the time to craft something worth keeping. Mom was a schoolteacher, the type of person who could light up a room with her smile. She loved books and filled our house with them. She always encouraged me to dream big and learn everything I could. Knowledge is the one thing no one can ever take from you, she used to say. Her warmth and wisdom shaped so much of who I am today. As a kid, I was full of energy. I'd spend my afternoons riding my bike with friends, climbing trees, or building forts in the woods behind our house. Summers were my favorite time of year. Long days spent swimming in the lake, playing soccer in the fields, or just lying on the grass, staring at the clouds and imagining what my future would look like. But life wasn't always perfect. My family faced its share of struggles, especially when Dad's carpentry business slowed down during tough economic times. I remember the tension in the house, the quiet conversations late at night when my parents thought I was asleep. But they never let it break them. They found ways to make things work, even when it wasn't easy. Their resilience taught me that no matter how hard life gets, you don't give up. School was, well, school. I wasn't the smartest kid in the class, but I wasn't the worst either. I was somewhere in the middle, more interested in getting outside and doing things than sitting at a desk. Still, I liked history and geography, subjects that made the world feel bigger than our little town. Looking back, I realize how much my parents sacrificed to give me a good life. They wanted me to have opportunities they didn't, to reach beyond what they could offer. That's why they pushed me to go to college, to dream beyond the boundaries of our small town. Childhood feels so far away now, but I carry those lessons with me every day. The love my parents gave me, the values they instilled, they're the foundation of everything I've built. It's funny how the things that seemed so ordinary back then are the things I cherish the most now. Meeting Amanda was one of those moments that felt like it was meant to be. I was 28 at the time, working in a corporate job that I didn't hate but didn't love either. It paid the bills and gave me a sense of stability, but deep down, I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do forever. One evening, a friend of mine dragged me to a networking event. I wasn't in the mood, but I went along, figuring I'd at least get a free drink out of it. The room was filled with people in suits, all chatting about deals and stocks, and I felt out of place. Then I saw her. Amanda had this aura about her. Confident, poised, and magnetic. She wasn't loud or flashy, but she carried herself with a kind of quiet strength that drew people in. We ended up at the same table during a discussion about real estate investments. I didn't know much about the field, but Amanda clearly did. She spoke with such passion and insight that I couldn't help but be impressed. After the event, I worked up the nerve to approach her. "You seem to know your stuff," I said, trying to sound casual. She smiled and replied, "I'd hope so. It's what I do for a living." That sparked a conversation that lasted well into the night. We talked about everything. Our dreams, our goals, even our favorite books. By the end of the evening, I knew I wanted to see her again. We started dating, and it didn't take long for me to realize she was the one. Amanda had this way of pushing me to be better without ever making me feel inadequate. She believed in me in a way that no one else ever had. About 2 years later, we got married in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. It was simple, intimate, and perfect. Not long after, Amanda suggested we start a business together. She'd been working in real estate for years and had a knack for spotting opportunities. I was hesitant at first. I didn't know the first thing about real estate, but Amanda was convinced we'd make a great team. She said, "You've got the discipline and drive, and I've got the experience. We can do this." So we took the plunge. We started small, buying and flipping a couple of properties. It was a steep learning curve for me, but Amanda guided me every step of the way. She handled the negotiations and the numbers, while I focused on operations and marketing. Slowly but surely, we built our business, expanding into rentals, commercial properties, and even consulting. Running a business together has its challenges, of course. There are days when we argue over strategies or stress about deals that don't go as planned. But at the end of the day, we're a team. We balance each other out. Amanda's the visionary, and I'm the planner. Our business has grown beyond what I ever imagined. We're not just buying and selling properties. We're helping people find homes, build businesses, and achieve their dreams. It's fulfilling in a way that my old corporate job never was. Looking back, I can't believe how much my life changed after meeting Amanda. She didn't just become my partner in life. She became my partner in building something meaningful. And for that, I'm grateful every single day. A week later, I was in the middle of reviewing some paperwork for a new property when my phone buzzed. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something told me I should pick up. "Mr. Den Harris?" The voice on the other end asked, formal and steady. "Yes, speaking," I replied, my stomach tightening slightly. "This is Officer Lang from the city morgue. I'm calling to inform you that your great-aunt, Lillian Harris, passed away 2 days ago. We found your contact information in her personal records as her closest living relative. Aunt Lillian." The name alone pulled me back decades. She was my grandfather's sister, a woman I hadn't seen in years but remembered vividly from my childhood. Lillian had always been eccentric, with a penchant for old books and obscure trinkets. She lived alone in a sprawling, dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of the city, a place that always felt both enchanting and unsettling to me as a kid. The officer continued, "We'll need you to come by and confirm her identity and discuss arrangements." She didn't leave explicit instructions. I stammered out my agreement, still trying to process the news. Sure, I'll be there tomorrow." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Sadness, yes, but also a vague sense of guilt. Aunt Lillian and I had drifted apart over the years, our lives taking completely different paths. The last time I'd seen her was at my father's funeral 5 years ago. She'd been frail but sharp, her piercing eyes making you feel like she could see right through you. When I told Amanda about the call, she looked at me with her usual mix of concern and practicality. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I think I need to handle this on my own. But thanks." That night I couldn't sleep. Memories of Aunt Lillian's mansion played in my mind like fragments of a dream. The towering bookshelves filled with dusty tomes, the peculiar antiques scattered around the rooms, and the air that always smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. It was a place that felt like it belonged to another era, much like Lillian herself. Little did I know, this trip to the morgue, and eventually back to her house, would unravel a part of my life I never could have anticipated. The following morning, I was sipping my coffee and trying to focus on the day ahead when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the name of a local law firm. Curious and a bit wary, I answered. "Mr. Harris?" The voice was smooth and professional, clearly belonging to someone used to delivering weighty news. "Yes, this is Den Harris. My name is Richard Elms. I'm an attorney handling the estate of your late great-aunt, Lillian Harris. I wanted to inform you that she has named you as the sole beneficiary in her will." I nearly choked on my coffee. Sole beneficiary? Of what exactly? Primarily her country house and its contents. There may be other smaller assets, but the house is the centerpiece. It's in relatively good condition, considering its age, and sits on a sizable piece of land. However, he paused, it will require some attention. "I assume you're familiar with the property." "Yeah, I've been there before," I said, the memory of the sprawling, eerie mansion flashing in my mind. "But it's been years." "Well," the lawyer continued, "you're welcome to come by my office to go over the details, or we can arrange a visit to the property together. I'll need you to sign some documents to formalize the transfer." I agreed to meet him later that afternoon, my mind racing with questions. Inheriting a house wasn't exactly on my list of expectations for the week. Amanda was intrigued when I told her, her real estate instincts immediately kicking in. "We could flip it," she said, her eyes lighting up with possibilities. "Country homes are in demand these days, especially if they're unique." "How big is it?" "Big enough to need a team to clean it out," I said with a half smile. "But let's hold off on the flipping plans until I see what I'm dealing with." Later that day, I met Richard Elms at his office. He was a man in his 60s, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. He handed me a thick envelope containing the will and some preliminary paperwork. "I took the liberty of arranging a locksmith and a cleaning crew should you decide to explore the house soon," he said, sliding the keys across the desk toward me. "But I must warn you, the house is peculiar. Your aunt was known for her unique taste." "Peculiar how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He hesitated. "Let's just say it reflects her personality. A bit unconventional, steeped in history. I recommend seeing it for yourself." That evening, as I looked over the papers, Amanda sat beside me, flipping through her laptop, likely researching property values in the area. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "More curious than nervous," I admitted. Aunt Lillian's house always felt like stepping into another world. Who knows what she left behind? Amanda smiled. "Well, it's ours now. Might as well make the most of it." But as I stared at the old-fashioned key lying on the table, a strange sense of foreboding crept over me. Something about the house and this sudden inheritance felt like the beginning of a chapter one wasn't entirely ready for. The next morning, Amanda and I packed the car and set out for Aunt Lillian's country house. It wasn't a long drive, about 2 hours, but the shift from city outskirts to winding rural roads made it feel like we were entering another world. Amanda was chatting excitedly about renovation ideas, but I was quiet, my mind drifting between childhood memories and a growing curiosity about what awaited us. As we pulled up to the house, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of nostalgia and unease. The place was enormous, even more imposing than I remembered. 3 stories tall with an aging stone facade. Its arched windows and ivy-covered walls gave it a gothic, almost storybook appearance. The surrounding land was overgrown, with wildflowers and unkempt shrubs spilling into a gravel driveway. Amanda stepped out of the car and took a long look at the house, her hands on her hips. "This place is incredible," she said. "It's got so much character. We could easily turn this into a luxury rental." I nodded but didn't say much. There was a heaviness to the air, something intangible that made me feel like we were trespassing, even though the deed was now in my name. We approached the front door, and I used the heavy brass key to unlock it. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit foyer filled with the smell of aged wood and dust. The sunlight streaming through the cracked stained glass windows cast multicolored patterns on the floor, creating an eerie but beautiful effect. "Wow," Amanda whispered, stepping inside. Her voice echoed faintly. "It's like a time capsule." The interior was just as I remembered. Ornate woodwork, tall ceilings, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Aunt Lillian had always been eccentric, and her love for antiques was evident in every corner. There were cabinets filled with porcelain figurines, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and walls adorned with oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors. Amanda wandered off, taking pictures with her phone and muttering ideas about restoration. Meanwhile, I stood in the center of the foyer, taking it all in. The house was silent except for the faint creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet. I opened a few doors, peeking into rooms filled with heavy drapes and old furniture covered in dust cloths. One room caught my attention. A study filled with stacks of yellowing papers, maps, and an assortment of strange objects, including what appeared to be a taxidermied owl perched on a stand. "That's unsettling," Amanda said, peeking over my shoulder. She laughed nervously. "Your aunt really had an eye for the unusual." "Yeah," I murmured, stepping further inside. On the desk, there was an open book, as if Aunt Lillian had been in the middle of reading it before she left it behind. The pages were covered in hand-drawn diagrams and notes in her handwriting. I couldn't make sense of it, but something about it felt deliberate, like she had left it there for someone to find. "Hey, Den, check this out," Amanda called from another room. I followed her voice and found her standing in a small parlor. She was pointing to a painting on the wall, a massive, almost life-sized portrait of a woman in Victorian-era clothing. The woman's expression was cold, her eyes piercing even through the layers of dust covering the canvas. "That's her," I said quietly. "That's Aunt Lillian." Amanda tilted her head. "She looks intense." "She was," I replied, unable to look away from the painting. As we continued exploring, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching us. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of light through the windows, felt charged with a strange energy. It wasn't necessarily threatening, but it wasn't welcoming either. By the time we finished our tour, the sun was beginning to set. Amanda was buzzing with plans, talking about contractors and potential buyers, but I was preoccupied. Something about the house didn't feel right. It was more than just its age or Aunt Lillian's odd taste. It was as if the place was alive, holding its breath, waiting. As we locked up and headed back to the car, I glanced back at the house one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move across one of the upstairs windows, but when I looked again, it was gone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the house was now shrouded in an eerie twilight. Amanda suggested we stay the night instead of driving back so late. "It's a long drive, and besides, this place has beds," she said, laughing lightly. Her excitement about the house was infectious, and I agreed. We brought in the blankets and food we had packed for the day and settled in the parlor. Dinner was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavier in such an old, cavernous house. The candles we had lit flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Amanda chatted about restoration plans, but I only half listened, my ears attuned to the faint creaks and groans of the house settling, or so I told myself. By the time we turned in for the night, fatigue was setting in. We chose one of the bedrooms on the second floor, a relatively dust-free room with a large four-poster bed. Amanda collapsed onto the mattress, marveling at how comfortable it was despite its age. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the unease that had been growing since we arrived. As we lay in the darkness, The house seemed to amplify every sound. The rustle of leaves outside became an ominous whisper. The distant ticking of an old clock in the hall was a relentless reminder of the silence. I was just beginning to drift off when it happened. A thud, then rapid, irregular scurrying in the next room. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. Amanda stirred beside me, her voice shaky as she asked, "Did you hear that?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, I heard it." For a moment, we just sat there, staring at the closed bedroom door. The sound came again, something running, almost scrambling, across the floorboards. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light enough to be a mouse or a raccoon. Whatever it was, it moved too quickly with too much purpose. "What do you think it is?" Amanda whispered, her hand gripping my arm. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Maybe an animal got in." Amanda didn't seem convinced, and neither was I. The air in the room felt charged, thick with something I couldn't name. I reached for the flashlight we had brought and quietly slid out of bed, motioning for Amanda to stay put. "Be careful," she whispered. I nodded and crept toward the door, every step making the floor creak under my weight. As I turned the doorknob and eased the door open, the hallway loomed before me, bathed in a faint, silvery light from the moon filtering through a cracked window. The scurrying had stopped, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I stepped into the hall, shining the flashlight toward the door of the adjacent room. It was ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. My pulse quickened as I approached. Just as I reached out to push the door open, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. It was as if something heavy had been knocked over, followed by a faint, low growl. I froze, gripping the flashlight tightly. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but curiosity, or stubbornness, kept me rooted in place. "Den, what's going on?" Amanda's voice called softly from the bedroom, breaking the tension. "Stay there," I whispered back, not wanting to alarm her further. Gathering what courage I could muster, I abandoned the room I was investigating and turned toward the staircase. The growling had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. I descended slowly, each step creaking beneath me. As I reached the bottom, I scanned the room with the flashlight. The parlor was exactly as we'd left it. Candles burned low, our plates and cups on the small table. But the antique cabinet against the far wall had been thrown open, its glass doors shattered. Papers and small trinkets littered the floor, as if someone or something had rifled through it in a frenzy. I crouched to pick up one of the papers. It was old, the ink faded, but I could still make out fragments of writing. It looked like some kind of ledger, or perhaps notes in Aunt Lillian's meticulous handwriting. Before I could study it further, a sound behind me made my blood run cold. A soft, wet breathing, just inches away. Slowly, I turned my head, the flashlight trembling in my hand. For a brief moment, the beam illuminated a figure, a shadowy, hunched shape with gleaming eyes reflecting the light. It moved too quickly for me to make out details, vanishing into the darkness like a wisp of smoke. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and bolted up the stairs. Whatever this was, it wasn't just an animal. Something was in this house with us, something that didn't want us here. I burst into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Amanda sat up in alarm, her face pale. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "There's something in the house," I said, locking the door and bracing myself against it. "It's not an animal. I don't know what it is, but we're not staying to find out." Amanda's eyes widened in fear. She scrambled out of bed and started grabbing our things. "We're leaving now," she said, her tone resolute. A loud thud reverberated through the hallway outside, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. My stomach dropped. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide anymore. Amanda grabbed my arm, her grip firm. "Den, we have to go." I nodded, adrenaline surging through me. "The window," I whispered. "We'll climb out and head to the car." Amanda didn't argue. Together, we shoved the heavy dresser under the doorknob to buy us some time. The sounds outside grew louder, more deliberate. A low growl echoed through the air, chilling me to the bone. Amanda unlatched the window, and I helped her climb out first. The drop wasn't too far, maybe 8 feet, but the overgrown grass below cushioned her fall. I handed her our bag of essentials before climbing out myself. As soon as I hit the ground, we bolted toward the driveway. The house loomed behind us, its dark silhouette ominous under the moonlight. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like 1,000 unseen eyes were fixed on our backs. Amanda fumbled with the car keys, her hands shaking. "Hurry," I urged, glancing back toward the house. Then I saw it. A shadowy figure emerged from the front door, moving with unnatural fluidity. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight, and its hunched form seemed to ripple with every step. It paused at the threshold, tilting its head as if watching us. "Get in," I shouted, yanking the car door open. Amanda jumped into the driver's seat, and I barely had time to slam my door shut before she started the engine. The headlights flicked on, illuminating the creature fully for the first time. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its skin was mottled and gray, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Long, gnarled limbs ended in sharp claws, and its mouth was a grotesque snarl, revealing jagged, blackened teeth. It let out a guttural scream that made my ears ring, then lunged toward us. Amanda floored the accelerator, and the tires screeched as we sped down the dirt driveway. I twisted in my seat, watching as the creature gave chase, its movements unnervingly fast and erratic. It kept pace with the car for a terrifying few moments before veering off into the shadows. We didn't stop until we reached the main road, the house now a distant memory in the rearview mirror. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. Amanda's knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, her face pale and drawn. "What the hell was that, Den?" she finally asked, her voice breaking. "I don't know," I admitted, running a shaky hand through my hair. "But it wasn't human." Amanda nodded, her eyes still fixed on the road ahead. Neither of us spoke for a long time, the weight of what we'd seen pressing down on us. That night, as we checked into a motel far from the cursed house, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The image of those glowing eyes burned in my mind, and an unsettling thought crept in. Aunt Lillian had lived in that house for years. Had she known? Had she been hiding something? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain. Something was wrong with that house. And whatever it was, it had let us go. For now. The following morning, Amanda and I sat in silence over coffee at the motel's tiny dining area. Neither of us had slept much. My mind kept replaying the night, the shadowy figure, the growl, the chase. Amanda looked just as shaken as I felt. "We need to tell someone," she said finally, breaking the silence. "The police, maybe? And say what? That we saw a monster in my dead aunt's house." I shook my head. "They'll think we're crazy." Amanda frowned but didn't argue. "So what do we do?" I exhaled, staring into my coffee. "We'll go back during the day. Whatever that thing was, it seemed to thrive at night. We'll take a better look at the house and figure out what's going on." Amanda looked horrified. "You want to go back? Den, that thing could still be there." "We can't just leave it," I said firmly. "If there's something dangerous in that house, it's better we figure it out than leave it for someone else to stumble across." Reluctantly, Amanda agreed. We spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies. Flashlights, a crowbar, a canister of mace, and a hunting knife I'd kept in the trunk of my car. Amanda insisted we needed more, but we couldn't exactly walk into a store and ask for anti-monster equipment. By noon, we were back on the road, heading toward the house. The closer we got, the more the unease settled in my chest. Even in daylight, the place had an oppressive air about it. Amanda's grip tightened on my arm as we pulled into the driveway. The house looked untouched, as if the horrors of the previous night hadn't happened. The front door hung slightly ajar, creaking faintly in the breeze. "We'll be quick," I assured Amanda, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. In and out, we stepped inside cautiously, the daylight streaming through the dusty windows casting long shadows across the floor. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and something metallic. I led the way, gripping the crowbar tightly. The living room looked the same as it had the night before. Aged furniture, faded wallpaper, and a layer of dust thick enough to write in. But as we moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled around us. In the hallway, we found a door we hadn't noticed the night before. It was slightly ajar, leading to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Of course there's a basement," Amanda muttered, her voice shaking. "Because why wouldn't there be?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity, and a strange pull I couldn't explain, drove me forward. "Stay here," I told Amanda. "Like hell I will," she snapped, grabbing a flashlight. "If you're going, I'm going." Together, we descended the creaking stairs. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the flashlight beams barely cut through the thick darkness. At the bottom, we found what looked like a workshop. Old tools and jars of unidentifiable substances lined the walls, and a heavy wooden table stood in the center of the room. But it was the far corner that caught my attention. There, under a tattered sheet, was a large, misshapen object. Slowly, I pulled the sheet back, revealing an ancient, ornate chest. The wood was dark and weathered, engraved with strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. Amanda gasped. "What is that?" "I don't know," I whispered. The chest radiated a strange energy, making my skin prickle. Against my better judgment, I reached for the latch. "Don't," Amanda pleaded, grabbing my arm. "Den, we don't know what's in there." I hesitated, but something compelled me to open it. With a deep breath, I flipped the latch and lifted the heavy lid. Inside was a collection of artifacts, small figurines, scrolls, and what looked like a bundle of human hair. But at the center of it all was a single, glowing crystal, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. The moment I touched it, a searing pain shot through my hand, and a deafening roar filled the room. The walls seemed to tremble, and from the darkness came the sound of heavy footsteps. "It's here," Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing noise. I grabbed the crystal, ignoring the pain, and shouted, "Run!" We sprinted up the stairs, the roar growing louder behind us. Something crashed through the basement as we burst out of the house and into the daylight. Amanda dove into the car, and I followed, clutching the crystal. As we sped away, the house loomed behind us, the windows seeming to glare like eyes. Whatever I had taken, it wasn't just an artifact, and whatever was guarding it wasn't done with us. The drive back to the motel felt like an eternity. The crystal pulsed in my hand, its glow dimming and brightening in a rhythm that seemed too deliberate to be random. Amanda sat next to me, silent, her eyes wide with fear. We didn't speak a word until we were well outside the town, the house disappearing in the rearview mirror like a bad memory. "What do we do now?" Amanda finally asked, her voice shaky. "What was that thing? And what did we just steal?" I glanced at the crystal in my palm. It was cool now, the glow fading, but it felt heavier somehow, like it was absorbing the fear in the air. I gripped it tighter, my mind racing. "I don't know, but I think we've just unleashed something." My voice was hoarse, like it didn't want to admit it. The things we'd encountered in that house, whatever they were no accident. It wasn't just the house that had been hidden. Something far worse had been waiting in the dark. Amanda shuddered, then said, "That thing in the basement. When you touched the crystal, it felt like the air was thick, like something had awakened. We need to get rid of it. Den, whatever that thing is, it's dangerous. I don't know if we can just get rid of it," I muttered, my thoughts muddled. "We barely escaped, and I don't think anyone is going to believe us if we tell them about this." We arrived back at the motel, and I parked in the lot with shaky hands. The sun was setting, casting an eerie glow over the surroundings. I tried to shake the unease crawling over my skin, but I couldn't. The strange sensation that something was watching us didn't fade when I turned off the engine. Amanda and I sat there in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning. My thoughts kept circling around the events at the house, trying to make sense of them. There was something about that crystal, something that didn't feel natural. I looked over at Amanda. "You're right. We need to find out more about this. If there's a way to get rid of it, we have to figure it out." She nodded, but her face was pale. "Where do we even start? What if there's more to this? What if—" Her voice trailed off, and I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Let's take it one step at a time," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll look for any information we can. We can't let this thing control us. If it has a history, we'll find it." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the motel's old floorboards made me jump. Every gust of wind outside seemed to carry a whisper. The crystal was still in my bag, and I couldn't bring myself to put it far from me, even though I knew it was dangerous. Something told me it wasn't done with us yet. The next morning, we got up early. I didn't want to stay in the town any longer than we had to, but I knew I couldn't just leave. I needed to know what was going on. I was ready to leave, but something inside me told me I couldn't walk away from this mystery. "Let's head to the library," I said, trying to push away my anxiety. "There has to be something there. Maybe someone knows about the house or the crystal." We drove to the local library, a small, dusty building that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. Inside, it was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of old books and forgotten histories. I approached the front desk and spoke to the librarian, a woman who looked like she'd seen more than her fair share of strange things. "I'm looking for information about a house outside of town," I said, trying to sound casual. "A really old place. Maybe there are some records or something about its history." She gave me a long, calculating look before nodding slowly. "You might want to check the back shelves. Some things are better left forgotten around here." I followed her advice, my mind racing. There had to be something in the library that would explain the strange occurrences. As I combed through the books, my fingers brushed against something that didn't feel like the rest. An old, weathered journal hidden in a corner. The leather binding was cracked, and as I opened it, I immediately recognized the same symbols that had been on the chest in the basement. Flipping through the pages, I found references to ancient rituals, forgotten deities, and curses. The journal spoke of a powerful object, the Heart of Darkness, which was believed to have the power to grant immense power, but at a price. Those who sought it were often driven mad, consumed by the very thing they sought to control. I froze. The crystal. It was called the Heart of Darkness in the journal, and it had been locked away for a reason. "Den," Amanda's voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to find her standing behind me, pale and shaken. "There's something else. I've been looking around, and I found something. Something that's making my skin crawl." "What is it?" I asked, my voice tight. "There's a local legend," she said, her eyes wide. "It's about a group of people who once tried to harness the power of the Heart of Darkness. They didn't survive. And there's a warning. Whoever owns it, whoever takes it, they're never alone." I felt a chill run down my spine as I looked back at the journal in my hands. I had just begun to realize the true nature of the force we had awoken. And now there was no turning back. I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. The weight of the information, of what we had unknowingly uncovered, felt suffocating. Amanda was right, we weren't alone. And the worst part? We didn't know how far this curse stretched or what it wanted from us. "Den," Amanda's voice trembled. "We need to get rid of that thing. The crystal. Before it's too late." I nodded, swallowing hard. The idea of destroying it had crossed my mind, but the journal's warning haunted me. Whoever owned the Heart of Darkness was never alone. What did that mean for us? What kind of forces had we invited into our lives by taking it? I felt a cold sweat trickle down my spine. I glanced around the library, trying to make sense of everything. We can't just toss it. We need to find a way to end this for good. Amanda stepped closer, her face pale, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay here, Denver. We need to leave the town. The people here, they know more than they're letting on. We can't trust anyone." She was right. There was something off about the people in the town. The librarian's cryptic response, the unsettling quiet that had followed us around the entire time. It all pointed to a hidden truth we weren't ready to face. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't run away from it. Not yet. I took a deep breath. "We'll go back to the house. There has to be something we missed. Something that can help us understand how to destroy this." Amanda hesitated, her hand trembling as she gripped my arm. "But we don't know what we're up against. What if What if it's too dangerous? I locked eyes with her. We can't keep running. We need to finish this. Together, reluctantly, Amanda nodded. We returned to the pickup truck, but the drive back to the house was unnervingly quiet. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the road, and every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I could swear I saw something moving in the distance, something watching us. The house seemed different when we returned. The air was heavier, oppressive, and the door creaked as we entered. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn deeper into a web we didn't fully understand. As we made our way through the house, I noticed a strange smell in the air, almost like incense or something burning. I was sure I hadn't smelled it before. We reached the basement, where the chest had been hidden. I didn't want to go down there, but I knew we had to. We had to confront whatever was in that chest, whatever had been set free. I opened the door and descended the creaky stairs, Amanda close behind me. The glow of the crystal seemed to flicker with every step I took. We reached the basement, and the air felt thick, too thick like it was alive. There, in the center of the room, the chest sat, but now something was different. The symbols on it glowed faintly, and the air around it hummed with energy. I looked at Amanda. It's here. It's all connected. The heart of darkness is calling to us. She stepped forward, eyes wide. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. The answer felt both simple and impossible. We have to destroy it, burn it. Whatever happens, we can't let it control us anymore. We found some gasoline in the corner of the room, likely left behind by the previous owners. I doused the chest with it, the smell overwhelming. As I struck a match and held it above the chest, I felt a wave of resistance wash over me, like the room itself was fighting back. But I couldn't stop now. We couldn't stop. The moment the match touched the gasoline, the room seemed to explode with light. The crystal in my hand glowed so brightly it hurt to look at. The chest began to rattle, the symbols on it flashing with an intensity one couldn't comprehend. Something screamed, no, it howled, from deep inside the chest. I didn't have time to react. The flames shot up, engulfing the chest. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure inside the fire. A shadow, tall and dark, moving toward us. But then, everything went black. I woke up on the cold basement floor, gasping for air. The house was silent. The fire was gone, and the chest had vanished. Amanda was by my side, shaking me awake. Den, are you okay? I rubbed my eyes, disoriented. What had just happened? What was real? The feeling of the darkness, of the thing that had been chasing us. It didn't feel over. I knew it wasn't. We did it, right? I asked, my voice hoarse. Amanda didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted around the room, and I followed her gaze. The walls were cracked, the air still thick with something unnatural. And then, I noticed it. On the floor in front of us, the crystal had returned. Its glow was faint, but it was there, pulsing with a life of its own. I picked it up slowly, my hand trembling. This wasn't over. And somewhere in the darkness, I knew that whatever had been unleashed was far from finished.